After winnowing down the list of possible Sith names from thousands to just 5 finalists, the fans voted from January 23rd to February 27th of 2007, and out of those 5 possible Sith names, only one could stand triumphant. The chosen name was Darth Caedus, or Caedus, chosen by Tanya Poland from a Latin word which means to cut. Del Rey and Lucasfilm thank Tanya in the acknowledgments to sacrifice, and contrary to what some people on the internet seem to think, the name was not chosen by a dude, but by a woman. Sacrifice by Karen Travis ultimately made it to number 8 on the New York Times bestseller list for the week of June 17th, 2007. As Sacrifice was the book that made me abandon the rest of the Legacy of the Force series all the way back in the mid-2000s. I don't have any good memories of Sacrifice. I don't think it was a throw a book against the wall type situation, but, well, it was pretty close. So first, a brief summary. The Skywalker and Solo family has been torn apart by Jacen Solo, and they see in him the chilling legacy of his grandfather, Darth Vader. But Jacen just wants peace and stability for the galaxy, and he's prepared to do anything to achieve that goal, even if it means following the teachings of Lumiya, the Dark Lady of the Sith. But before Jacen can unlock the true power of a Sith Lord, he must pass one final test of sacrificing someone that he loves. But what troubles Jacen the most is not whether he has the strength to murder someone he loves, but who precisely that sacrifice should be. So after a book that heavily focused on Han Solo and Leia Organa, Sacrifice really puts them off on the back burner here, and they are barely present in the story. Instead, the plot mainly revolves around Jacen Solo struggling to figure out who his sacrifice will be, and undertaking a military coup in the process to eliminate Cal Omos from power. Ben Skywalker completes his mission that led to him really questioning himself and how much he wants to associate with Jacen, and immediately jumps back into associating with Jacen until he is asked to complete a task that has horrible, terrible consequences for someone he knows. Mara Jade decides that Lumiya needs to die, and so she's going to hunt down Lumiya and kill her, while Luke and the rest of the Jedi Council remain very concerned about Jacen, yet aren't willing to do really anything about it. Probably about half the book is devoted to Boba Fett and what's going on Mandalore. Definitely your mileage may vary territory there. And finally, Lumiya continues to push Jacen towards accepting his dark fate. She doesn't know who his sacrifice should be. At various times she assumes he's going to sacrifice different people, and she's just there as his weirdly fanatical support group. So what did I think of Sacrifice? I hated it. That's it. That's the review. Thanks for coming. Bye. Okay, no, but seriously, this was a very tough read for me. I don't know what's worse, to read something and you don't know the outcome, and the outcome hits you like a freight train, and you just want to lay down on the floor and cry, or reading a book where you know what will happen, you know what's coming, so it's almost like you're going from chapter to chapter just dreading when it will appear. And I'll get into that in a bit, but I found the chapter structure here, the structure of the story, very interesting. I was dreading so much of the book when really the pivotal events that made me so angry, so willing to give up on the series that first go around, happens relatively late in the story. So let's talk characters first. I was somewhat surprised that after a book where Ben's parents wanted to keep him away from Jacen, and Ben literally ran away from the Jedi Temple to do something for Jacen, that Ben was just allowed to reintegrate himself into the Galactic Alliance Guard again, and his dad doesn't say anything, and his mom's just like, I'm here for you, honey, I'm just glad you're okay. Like, if you were worried enough about him to remove him from this whole situation at the end of book 3, why would you just let him go back to this in book 5? I guess I was expecting that Ben's experiences in book 4 would lead to a definite break between him and Jacen, but that break did not come until further into book 5. That Ben's troubled about things, but he still is willing to follow orders. He's willing to be sent to assassinate Jacen because, well, Jacen tells him so. And he doesn't really feel good about it, but he also feels like this is a responsibility that he's been given and feel more competent. You feel more adult, even though he is only 14. But then, of course, he carries out the assassination. Jacen dies, and one of his colleagues in the Galactic Alliance Guard sacrifices himself so that Ben and Shevu can get away. And that turns out to be actually the big breaking point for Ben. We're doing this task, not being allowed to take responsibility for it, and having someone else die as a result, I think rubs into him that he is a young kid in a bad situation, and it leads to him overhearing that Jacen is allied with Lumiya and then telling his mother about it, although that really doesn't work out well for Mara in the end. Mara, meanwhile, is, I would say, fixated on killing Lumiya. I don't know if this is because Karen Traviss is new to these characters and the post-Return of the Jedi era, or what, because I feel like some authors come in and I feel like their characterization of different people fits the existing stuff we know about them, but here there is such a focus on that Mara, as the Emperor's hand, was an assassin, to the point that it becomes like the key defining characteristic of her character, that Mara has killed countless people in the past. And on the one hand, yes, Mara was the Emperor's hand. She was one of the Emperor's personal agents, and no doubt she carried out assassinations. But I think to focus on assassination as like the only thing she did doesn't really reflect the role that she played, that she was less the Emperor's personal assassin and more his personal agent, that she would retrieve information, she would warn people, you know, you stop this or the Emperor will send someone else. And I think it's almost become shorthand in some stories that, like, Mara wears the cat suit, Mara used to kill people, Mara's very dark. But I don't really agree with that interpretation of her. It just feels way too limited to me. And so the whole time I was reading Sacrifice, we have stuff where Mara's like, oh, if only I had known what Palpatine really was, I could have killed him and then saved everything. And she's talking about raising her child up to be a soldier and to kill people. And like, well, that's what we've raised him for. And I'm like, wait, what? Like, this is just such a limiting interpretation of Mara, and I really don't like it, and I really don't feel like it shows the well-roundedness of her character at all. I do think that authors tend to struggle sometimes with Mara, and she gets written less than three-dimensionally, and so this should have just been par for the course. But I think after Mara playing a more limited role in other books, to have her such a focus here and feel so off to me was one of the aspects of Sacrifice that made it so off-putting, both in my initial read and in this reread, like over 15 years later. Luke continues his streak of just not doing anything. On the one hand, Mara's like, I'm gonna take care of Lumiya, and he trusts her, but also, like, their relationship hasn't been super good in these books. They seem they're feuding at times, and it definitely felt for bits of this book that Mara was keeping Luke in the dark, and if she hadn't kept him in the dark, like, maybe none of this would have happened. Again, so frustrating to read. And it just makes me question why 5 books in, Jacen has not been confronted really by anyone. Mara briefly confronts him here, and she's just basically like, leave my son alone. And he is a Jedi. Why has there been no disciplinary action against him? Instead, it's like, well, he's a Jedi, but he's doing his own thing now. And it's like, yeah, he's doing his own thing. He had a military coup. People may not realize he's behind it, but he was, and now he is one of 2 chiefs of state. This is bad. And then I was really surprised by how Luke confronting Lumiya at the end of the book played out. This is not a duel. This was an execution. Lumiya was willing to die to divert attention from Jacen, but even with the situation that Luke was in, I was really shocked by his actions here, because to save someone from falling and then just chop their head off, I don't know if I want to say that doesn't sound like the Luke I know, but whoa, what the heck is going on here? On the political front, we don't really get a lot of battles with the Confederation. I was sort of expecting that coming off of book 4, where we have the Bothans and Corellia and Cominor and like Fondor and Adjumar joining forces, and then we have that conference that's a trap, and I was expecting this book to just be like the Confederation tried to take more things, but it just went all political again, like in Bloodlines, which I did find a little surprising, that I was expecting, I guess, naval battles, and instead it was all wiretapping and following Cal Omos to this secret meet up with the Prime Minister of Corellia, and then assassinating the Prime Minister of Corellia, then arresting Cal Omos because he's been conspiring and it's treason. And there's a lot too of like Jacen learning legal stuff and seeing how he can word things so that things get passed that then give him more power. Just a lot more politics than I expected. And after being a huge part of book 2, and then not appearing at all in books 3 and 4, Boba Fett and his granddaughter and Mandalore and the Mandalorians reappear here. It honestly felt like half the book was just Fett. And again, for the most part, felt somewhat removed from the story at large. He tracks down the clone and he says, look, I'm dying. I really need you guys to help me out. And because he's stepped up and he's like actually being the Mandalore now, the clone's willing to help him, and he's seems to be cured of his illness. And the Mandalorians discover more Beskar on Mandalore, so they make an alliance with the Verpine, and they're building ships, and they're gonna help the Verpine attack another world that the Verpine are feuding with. And then he finds out at the end that his ex, Sintas Vel, is still alive, that she's been frozen in carbonite for like 30-something years, and so I guess when he shows back up in book 8, that's what he'll be doing. I think that the stuff with Boba is interesting. I just almost wonder if it should have been like a separate trilogy. Just have a trilogy about Boba Fett and the Mandalorians, because the way it feels is that it's completely absent from the non-Travis books. And then we get to a Karen Travis novel, and it's like half the story, and it's tangentially related to what's going on with the Civil War, but it's really just like Boba Fett doing his own thing. And I think especially for Fett fans, for Mandalorian fans, that's so interesting. But I wonder at times, like, how does this fit with the overall story here? Especially when we don't see the Mandalorians in any of the other books. I feel like either separate them out into their own story or integrate them better. Have the Mandalorians pop up in the other authors' novels, but that's not what happened here. And on the baddie front, Lumiya is confident that Jacen is going to make his sacrifice, he's going to immortalize his love, and then he will become the Lord of the Sith, and then he will have further powers that he doesn't have now, but she doesn't know who that is. He's gonna have to figure that out on his own. She has, meanwhile, commandeered that Sith vessel that Ben used to escape from Ziost. And even though she's teaching Jacen, she comes across more as Jacen's minion here. I guess his willing minion. In that fanatical way of hers, she's willing to sacrifice herself. But when he says, "You need to get Mara Jade off my back," she goes and leads Mara and they get into a fight. Or when Jacen doesn't want people to find out about the climactic events here, she goes and she accepts blame for it and she dies because of it. And Jacen is just all over the place. For most of the book, he is convinced that his sacrifice has to be Ben, but he really doesn't want to personally kill Ben because he does like his young cousin, even if he is a terrible, terrible teacher to him. And it's almost like when he sends Ben off to assassinate Dirge Gejjen, he expects Ben to die, and that will be his sacrifice. But Ben doesn't die, so then he's still like, "Oh, can I kill Ben?" And he briefly thinks at one point that maybe it's Alana, but he's instantly like, "No, it can't be Alana." And he ends up killing someone that he does not love in any way. So he's like, "Oh, well, that didn't fulfill the prophecy. Weird." And then at the end, he realizes the prophecy wasn't about me, it was about Ben. And that's how Ben will become susceptible to the dark side, is because he'll have to avenge the person that I killed because Ben loves them and not me. Okay, here's my issue number one. And I've tried, keep back spoilers here, but if you have not read Sacrifice, this is the point of no return. Turn away, leave. I'm gonna talk about the stuff that made me so freaking mad here. I think that Jacen killing Mara and Mara being that sacrifice that makes him a Sith Lord is a huge cop-out, and it doesn't work for the prophecy at all unless you do what Jacen did and you reinterpret the prophecy to refer to someone else. Those tassels, none of the other ones seemed to hint at a person besides Jacen. In fact, most of them seemed very targeted at Jacen. And so I think to say Jacen has to kill someone that he loves, and then for it to turn around and be Mara Jade, who is Jacen's aunt, but he doesn't love, and they're not even really friends at this point. If any of the Solo kids had a close connection to Mara, it would be Jaina, and I would probably put Anakin even more than Jacen because the two of them have spent the most time with Mara. Mara was Jaina's master, and then Mara taught Anakin a lot in the New Jedi Order books leading up to Star by Star. And I really thought, going into Sacrifice, that the ones it made most sense to be Jacen's sacrifice was Ben or Alana, perhaps Tenel Ka, and then maybe his mother or his father. If we look at it as who is expendable, who would shock the readers, but we don't need for the rest of the story, you need Ben. You can't kill Ben off. You can't kill Alana when so much of what Jacen's doing seems to be because he wants to protect her. He wants to make the world a safer place for her. And I guess he could have killed Tenel Ka, but then it would have led to all that craziness that the third book was hinting at. And I can't see that happening. And I guess maybe they felt like killing Han or killing Leia would be a step too far. But what really kills me about Jacen killing Mara here is that it feels like it's directed at the reader, at the fans, that rather than choosing someone who makes sense for the prophecy, who makes sense for the story, they chose someone who they considered expendable and who they knew the fans would be upset when they died. And that the fact that if you think too hard about it, it doesn't really make sense here, doesn't matter. And I don't know who suggested that Mara be the sacrifice. I know that it wasn't Karen Travis, because she said in a tweet that it wasn't her. She didn't even really know who Mara was when they were planning the series and it was suggested. And I can still say that the fact that they chose to kill Mara off in this book makes me raging mad. And I know I am not alone here. Just as some people read Vector Prime, got to Chewie's death, and were like, that's it, I'm not reading any further. I know people who got to this part in Legacy of the Force and said, that's it, I'm not reading any further. Screw this series, I give up. And that was me in 2007. I didn't read any further because I was so angry that this happened. And to all the people out there who felt that way, I understand you. Your feelings are completely valid. I agree with you. My second issue, let's talk about the structure. There are 24 chapters here, and it felt like the first 10 or so chapters were heavily weighted page-wise. That they were long, they were lengthy, to the point that I got to the end of chapter 10 and I was like more than halfway through the book, but there's 14 chapters left, which means that the later chapters are much shorter. And I don't know how I feel about that, especially because Jacen killing Mara and her family feeling her death and Luke tracking down Lumiya and all that. It's just like such a small part of the book. And I guess maybe my memories had hyped it up like, this is the book where Mara dies, oh my gosh, it's such a pivotal part. When really like a huge chunk of the book is Boba Fett being the Mandalore and Jacen doing political stuff and overthrowing Cal Omos. And like the actual sacrifice section of Sacrifice was much shorter than I expected. My final issue, Jacen's moment when he, at the very end in the last chapter, when he's like looking at himself in the mirror and he names himself as a Sith. I don't know why, but that moment just fell completely flat for me. I think it may be the Sith in the movies. I feel like it's really easy to get at the root of their name, so you hear their name and you know what it means. Darth Vader, Darth Sidious. And you look at Vader, and I know some people say, oh, it's Dutch for father. No, obviously it's invader. He invades Leia's ship in A New Hope. He invades the Jedi Temple and kills the Jedi. Perfect. It sounds sci-fi, but you can get at the root there. And with Darth Sidious, he's this insidious figure. He's hiding behind the scenes the whole time, manipulating everything. Again, you see his name and you know what it means. But then with Caedus, it comes from a Latin word meaning to cut, but I feel like most people look at it and they're just like, Caedus, okay, what does that mean? I don't know what that means. And second, in Darth Plagueis, when Sidious receives his Sith name, Plagueis gives it to him. We have the scene of he, basically names him. This is your Sith name. Same in Revenge of the Sith, where after Anakin throws Mace Windu out the window, Palpatine has him kneel, and he's like, "Arise, Darth Vader." And in the novelization, he's like, "Vader, yes, that's who I am, I'm Vader." And so I guess the scene here with Jacen is different because a master doesn't name Jacen. Lumiya doesn't give him his Sith name. He names himself. And I suppose it has meaning in the dark side to him. But I think especially the way that it ends the book, he's like, "Yes, I'm Darth Caedus." And it's like, book end. But Caedus? What does Caedus mean? Where did Caedus come from? I mean, it came from the Darth Who contest, but it didn't really seem to have personal meaning to Jacen. It's just a name that comes out. So, in short, I found Sacrifice a very difficult read. And part of that is because Mara Jade is one of my absolute favorite characters. And I feel like not just in her end, but also in her portrayal here, I just don't agree with any of it. I also think that, again, there's just way too much Boba Fett. If he had to be here, that he was better integrated into the story rather than just popping up every few books. But this is definitely the turning point of the series. Jacen's been pretty dark side all along, but he can't go back at this point. He's a Sith Lord now. He's Darth Caedus. And he's also the Chief of State, so I have a feeling that things are going to be getting much, much worse. Next time, I will be reading Book 6 in the Legacy of the Force series, Inferno by Troy Denning.